Okay, so it is officially 7 o'clock. And for those of you who don't know who I am Catherine Haskins, and I am the founder of the Bridge Club. And as I mentioned, we are here to be able to bring amazing topics forward for you to include your voice into. And tonight's is no different. This topic has been going on for years. I remember when I joined veterinary medicine over 15 years ago. I am not a veterinarian or a technician. I should clarify that in case anyone is curious. I am just someone who cares about this profession. But when I first came into this profession, the veterinary shortage, where were we going to get veterinarians? What were we going to do? Could we get more colleges? Has been a topic of discussion for a long time. And I'm so excited that we actually get to give an exclamation point on that conversation tonight with the unveiling of new schools that are going to be opening. But more importantly, we're not just saying, hey, look at the new schools. We are going to talk about what this means for veterinary medicine moving forward. And this is powerful and impactful. So I'm excited. We have an amazing panel. Now, first and foremost is a dear, dear friend of mine as well is Mark Cushing. He is the CEO of the Animal Policy Group and a continual supporter of the Bridge Club. We also have deans. We have 3 deans with us this evening. We have Dean Dr. Eleanor Green, and so she is with Lyon College Veterinary School, so the brand new one that just opened up that she's going to talk a little bit about. We've got Dean Stacy, and Stacy, I've just lost you on my little sheet here. Anderson, your name always eludes me. I know you as Dr. Stacy, and every time it's the last time it gets me. And she's with Lincoln Memorial. And then one of my favorite people, if you do not follow him on Facebook, I highly encourage that you do, is Dr. Rustin Moore. He is with the College of Veterinary Medicine for Ohio State University. He has the best memes that he puts out there with animals. It is amazing. Makes me laugh every single day. We're all going to jump in and have this conversation with regards to what is happening with these new schools as they come to light. So before we jump in on all the deets, if you will, let's start with our toast with Mark Cushing, my friend.
Right. Very simple toast. What a wonderful future it would be if every qualified young person in America that dreamed of being a veterinarian could attend a veterinary school. And that requires enough schools to take care of that demand. So cheers to that idea.
Cheers, cheers. So let's dive into quick background. So again, everyone, your questions matter right now. I'm going to ask that if you are not talking, that everyone go ahead and mute their line just to make sure that we don't have any additional background noise. If you have a question, go ahead and post it in the chat. We will also call on you too to verbally potentially give that question if in fact we have the time to be able to do so. Otherwise, we are joined by Dr. Cheryl Good. So Cheryl, if you will wave, she is our Chief Veterinary Officer at the Bridge Club, and Shannon Nowak, who is our Vice President of Education. They will help pull forward any of questions that you are bringing up tonight. That's really important. Okay, so let's back up. This is a big issue. And right now, how many schools, Mark, do we have currently open and running in veterinary medicine in the United States?
There's 33 schools. The most recent is Texas Tech, which is open. I think it's a year away from graduating its first class. Both Long Island and University of Arizona graduated classes this year. Before that, of course, we had Lincoln Memorial and Midwestern. So that's 33. There are also the 2 schools that many very successful American veterinarians attended, Ross and St. George in the Caribbean, who are about 90% US students. There's 5 schools in Canada.
Okay. But let's talk about how many students are graduating, how many people are leaving veterinary medicine, and why there's this offset. Stacy, can you help, or Dr. Stacy, can you help give us some sort of perspective, if you will, with regards to like how many students graduate every year? And then do we also have any idea of how many are leaving the profession and how that is offsetting with some of the demand that's out there?
Sure. So in preparation for this, I went to aavmc.org, which is our American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges. That is a governing body, I guess, for all of the colleges and schools of veterinary medicine in the US, and also quite a few of the international programs if they're accredited by the AVMA. And they have on that site a really a lot of data. Rustin and I were both on the data committee, or I'm still him, and he's off of it now. But AAVMC puts forward a lot of effort to collect data from veterinary schools. And so if we look at that from the last year's report, this year we're working on it currently for the 2023 report. But last year, 2022, there was 3,355 graduates in the U.S. schools. And at the same time, there was over 4,000 first-year DVM students. So definitely an increase, around 700 students from graduating class to first-year class. And then if we add in the international numbers, then you're going to add in around 895 more students. So you're graduating around a total of a little over 4,000 U.S. citizens from various veterinary schools programs across the world in a given year. As far as the numbers of and turnover, things like that, I don't really have good data for that, other than I check Indeed.com regularly. And it is usually around 12 to 14,000 jobs open for veterinarians in a given time. And I looked today, and there's 12,469 jobs, and 2,000 were posted in the last 2 weeks. So
Oh my goodness.
quite a lot of jobs.
So let me ask you this, because I'm a mother of a daughter who is applying to grad school. She is not going into veterinary medicine, but she is going into the medical field. And so, you know, I'm terrified of, is she going to get turned away? How many students are turned away in veterinary medicine? Do you want to answer that one, Mark?
Well, there's a couple numbers that are interesting. First of all, everybody should go to Amar's Veterinary Health website and see Dr. Jim Lloyd's latest update. He took his earlier work and really expanded it. So every question you've asked, Catherine, it's accessible. I'm not sure what the link is, but
We'll find it.
People will find it, and it's a lot of depth. Number one, the number that's generally understood, and Rustin and Stacy as current deans, and Eleanor could correct me, and would probably love to correct me in case of Rustin. So I'll give you that chance. But usually the number is that there are at least 2,000 students that qualify in what would be called the bottom quarter of students that were admitted. That's an important number. Of the students that are admitted to schools in the U.S., there's another 2,000 that fit the academic profile, if you will, of those students, but didn't get in. They may go offshore, they may go elsewhere, they may go into other medical fields. The number could be as high as 3,000. But there's an overall pretty good sense. We've all heard the phrase forever, it's harder to get in the vet school than med school. So I think there's sort of a general blanket across medically inclined students that may want to be veterinarians, and it's a tough place to go because there's one medical school for every 1.4 million Americans, and there's one vet school for every 5.5 million pets. So it's fairly clear we've made a choice so far as to the medical needs of one species versus another. So I'll just throw that out to get the debate going here.
Well, let's dive in with those numbers, and let's understand why didn't we have, or don't we have, more veterinary schools? I think that this has been something that's been very interesting across the board. Of if we have 12,000, let's say we're, you know, shy of 12,000 based on Indeed right now, why aren't we producing more veterinarians? Really curious on if you could walk us through a little bit of that, and obviously then having Dr. Rustin and Dr. Stacy jump in on their points of view as well.
I'll give you one fact, but I'd love to have the deans really jump in as true experts. But and nobody could see this coming, so it's not a mistake that was made. It was just not, the circumstances changed so radically. From 1985 to 2014, that 30-year period, United States doubled its populations, medical schools increased by 45%, and we added one vet school. And it wasn't because people tried and didn't. There was just not a sense, because the whole revolution with pets hadn't occurred, and the millennials and Gen Zs that are now half the pet owners in America hadn't emerged, if you will. So we had no idea the kind of quiet shortage that would develop over time, and the demand factor was the biggest factor. That's what's changed. There are a lot more Americans, but the ones that want to have pets and want to have high level pet care, pet health care, that's been the biggest factor. It's not schools that didn't do it, but also they're expensive to operate unless there's certain new models we'll talk about later today. But I'd love to hear from Rustin and Stacy and Eleanor, just your perspective on why we didn't see more schools emerge in that particular window.
Well, I'll jump in. First, I think it's really important what you just said, Mark. Veterinary schools, the traditional sort of what I would say comprehensive, most of which have been at land grant institutions over the last 100+ years. 25 of the current 33 are at land grants, and they are expensive to operate. And that's because we typically have a centralized veterinary teaching hospital that is expensive to operate, and that's where we prepare our students during their third and fourth year. And so that's something that's expensive. And we all know that research is important to advance the profession, advance animal health, and even human health with comparative medicine. But research is not cheap, and it's typically, I don't like to use the word subsidized, but it is subsidized, or we invest more heavily in research than we get revenue for. And so the other thing that's happened over time is because state funding at most colleges of veterinary medicine who are funded by the state has gone down, or has certainly not kept up with inflation. And so the other thing is it becomes very expensive from a tuition perspective for students. So those are the things that I think are probably really drove the fact that there weren't more veterinary schools opening, at least at land grant institutions, with following I'll say the traditional model of education.
There used to be 27 veterinary schools, and this is back in the 70s and 80s, and all of a sudden 9 new veterinary schools came around. And if we look at the history of veterinary medicine, it used to be federally funded almost exclusively. And then the federal funds started going down and the state funds started coming up. And then the state funds started going down, and the schools themselves had to step up and fund these veterinary schools at the same time that the cost of education was rising, increased technologies. Teaching hospital today isn't what it used to be. And if you look at every single state out there, every single one of them would tell you they want a vet school. But why don't they do it? They say in the end, it's cheaper to pay the out-of-state tuition for those who do that to go to a surrounding school than it is to do it themselves. And so that has actually retarded the growth in some places. It certainly kept University of Florida from having a school for many years. But I think now those who are doing it are happy that they have. And Rusty, I think your point about the teaching hospitals, it's one of the benefits of the distributive model is that the expense of a teaching hospital can be avoided. So I think those are some of the factors.
And Catherine, here's a great statistic. We're throwing around stats, but it's important. When University of Florida, where Eleanor had a large animal and obviously a great vet school, when it opened in Gainesville, Florida had 8 million people. I think the class size was 80. They ultimately increased to a whopping class size of 120. I'm saying that facetiously, of course. And the legislature conditioned most of that growth on being out-of-state students. In other words, they will pay a higher level of tuition. So think about that. Now, what's the population of Florida today? 23 million people. It has 1 vet school. And there's a reason why Dr. Anderson and LMU is planning to open a program just outside of Jacksonville. I mean, you think about that dimension. The state's population has tripled. And what else has happened at the same time? There's been a whole generational change in how we look at pets and the level of care we want. So demand has gone up. The average pet owner who's a millennial or Gen Z want more health care, which is a great problem to have, right? And Bob Lester will tell you that it's nice to have people come into the clinic and want more of what you have. You just have to have the thing called people to deliver it. So no one made a mistake. We just couldn't see, and nobody could have seen kind of what was coming. So that's why today you have, the number of new schools, because it's so clear to folks that there's a
How is
shortage.
this balancing with what we also see? You know, you see where some people say we don't have a veterinary shortage, so should we even open any more schools? Or so how is this balancing with any of that noise that's out there as well?
I'll just toss this in, kind of a log on the fire if it's okay. But if you talk to practices on the ground, there's an acute shortage. You may be somewhere else in the US looking at other data and try to interpret it differently. But if you talk to practices on the ground, there's an acute shortage, period. And it's provable, and it's sad. It's not a statistic. It's real life of people that can't get care for pets. Why are shelter numbers going up? Real simple. People are returning pets to shelters, not because they don't have the money to care for a pet. They can't provide medical care for a pet because they can't get into a clinic. That's just a fact right now. So I think there are people that worry about, oh my God, like they worried 10 years ago, vets are going to be on the street with a cup begging for money because too many vets are out there. But the truth is, human medicine has tackled a shortage for 60 years, and it's still 100,000 professionals short. In other words, this shortage there's not going to never be no shortage, but you have to address it. And that's, it just takes time to do it now. And that's what the new schools.
If I could follow up on that. So back around 2012, Dr. Lonnie King was our dean here, and we increased our class size from 140 to 165. And everybody came at us with weapons for doing that, because we were going to, overproduce veterinarians. And, it's many of those people today who will say to me, can you send me some veterinarians? And so, I remember a saying that Lonnie said, which is, where you stand on an issue depends on where you sit. And so, many people in the profession are looking 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month out, because that's where they're looking. And other people are looking further out. So I actually do think Mark is right that maybe this snuck up on us, but in a sense, it didn't sneak up on us. Yes, we had some other things that played into it, a pandemic and many other things, but I think there weren't enough of us, and I'm not saying I was one of them, that wasn't looking ahead enough into the future to predict what we would need to be, able to serve. And I'll also say, it's also not just the number; it's also the composition of our profession. We will not serve all of the communities that we need to and that we should and could, unless our profession more closely resembles them. And I don't mean just gender or race or ethnicity. I'm also talking rural. I'm talking specialists. We just had a meeting of a few veterinarians on Friday, and 3 of them said, we need 3 veterinarians. We need to hire 3 more veterinarians. And these practices are already reasonably sized. So, I'm not going to get into slinging mud about, is there a shortage or isn't there? I believe there is. And yes, clearly it depends on, where you are, but there's enough need in academia, specialty, rural, and even non-rural areas, at least from what I'm here on the ground every day, that we need to address that, whether it's expanding class sizes or, expanding schools.
And I'm going to jump in on
Oh.
this too, because this is really important to me, but I'm going to make a very provocative statement that I've made before. I'm not sure it's possible to graduate too many veterinarians. Think about that for a minute. And the reason for that is there are 2 things. One is that workforce studies, every workforce study that's ever been done since the beginning of time, the first one back in 1978 that I know of, every single one has concluded an oversupply of veterinarians, and every single one of them has been wrong. Why? Because they were all measured according to what we have today. They were good studies performed by good people generating good data, but veterinary medicine exists in a changing world, and the data were interpreted with the assumption that veterinarians would not change, that veterinary medicine would not change. We wouldn't adapt. We always have, and we always will. And so I think that's one of the most important things. And the other thing I'll say is that when most people talk about workforce shortage, they think of the small animal, companion animal veterinarian. They don't think of the entire complexity of careers that there are out there for veterinarians. I would also argue that veterinary medicine is one of the broadest educations that a person can get in today's world. Medicine, technologies, all those different things, service to the public. It's an extremely broad, feeding the world, go on and on and on. And we can do anything. And we have given up so much because we weren't able to serve it. Look, we lost swine, we've lost equine reproduction, largely, we've lost poultry, largely, we've lost a lot of beef cattle, and a lot of that is because we weren't able to serve it. Clients had to have some help. They looked elsewhere, and guess what? They found it. And once we give it up, we're not getting it back. And I still believe that veterinarians are the best source of the best care for animals that exist today. And if we don't get enough people out there in all the different areas to serve this profession, we're going to lose it piece by piece, as has already been proven in history, as we go forward. And so I don't think there's a shortage. It's not debatable for me. There just isn't.
The other, I saw a couple.
Applause on that. I'm just saying.
Catherine, here's an interesting trip, not very far down memory lane. Just 10 years ago, there was a major vote in the House of Delegates at the AVMA in Atlanta in 2010, I think it was, to stop accreditation of foreign schools, all driven by a fear of foreign vets coming in. And then in 2014, I debated Jim Wilson, Paul Pine, and Dennis McKiernan at AVMA in Denver about an oversupply of veterinarians. That was the premise of the debate. And I said, I raised my hand and said, I'll come in and say we actually don't have an oversupply. You know, my point is, it's been very recently that there's been a sense that we have an oversupply. There's been this fear factor and I think what we didn't do is sort of walk outside of our clinics or walk outside of our schools or houses and look around and see how many people had pets and how much they wanted their pets to live as long a life and healthy a life as they possibly could. And they wanted a whole different style of veterinary medicine, including doctors teaching them how to take care of their pets. And we missed the whole demand curve, and suddenly it's just taken off. I mean, the most recent data that Chewy shared in the Fountain Report article was great, which is the majority of Americans will spend more money on their pets' healthcare than themselves if given a choice.
I also wanted to address, I saw a couple questions or comments in the chat more about the greater healthcare team, and certainly, you know, the rate limit, couple people mentioned rate limiting step for them is not having enough staff. And clearly, I mean, it's without question, there is a shortage of veterinary technicians, credentialed, licensed, registered, whatever it is. And, you know, I actually, just like I think with the shortage, I mean, if you look at compensation of veterinarians has dramatically increased in the last few years, thankfully. And also it's now doing the same thing with veterinary technicians, and there's programs, and we have one here, but, you know, there's a pipeline of, you know, veterinary assistant training programs to employers paying for online veterinary technician school and getting their clinical training, and salaries are going up as they should. We do have to practice more efficiently as a team and let veterinary technicians practice at the top of their license and pay them for it. And also the same thing for vet assistants, to free up veterinarians to do and practice at the top of their license. And I'm not saying that's a new thing. I mean, I think a lot of practices do that, but there's a lot of practices that don't, and that might be because they don't have enough staff. But we really need to do that, and we need to change the course of veterinary technicians leaving the profession, you know, within 5 to 6 years, and they're leaving it for two reasons. One, they're not getting paid what they need or deserve, and two, they don't feel valued because they're not being allowed to use the skills and experience and education that they have to the highest level of their license.
So part of that is also the educational approach, right? What veterinarians are taught, how to utilize their technicians. So this is the great opportunity to now pivot real quick. We will be getting to more of the questions. Mark, so let's talk about these schools. Let's talk about how many are coming, where are they, what hurdles are they facing in order to be able to open, and when they will open. And then also we want to talk about that educational approach. So I know we're going to dive into that with Dr. Eleanor and Dr. Stacy a little bit on the educational approach of what's going to be happening at these new schools.
Let me just listen and then we'll kick it to the dean. So there's programs at Clemson, which I'm not clear if it'll have a teaching hospital or not. I'm told it may have distributed, but former Auburn dean, a terrific friend of all the folks here, Tim Businger, as provost there, headed that up. Rowan University in New Jersey has both legislative support and large donor support, so that's number 2. And I'm involved with 6 programs, one of which delightfully has Eleanor as new dean, Lyon College. It should be in Little Rock, Arkansas, next to the Clinton Library. There's a new program at an HBCU in Maryland I'm working with, University of Maryland Eastern Shore, one of the 1890 Black land grant schools. Right now, we just have Tuskegee, a private HBCU. This will be addressing the DEI issue, among others. The parent of Ross is opening, proposing, and all these are proposing to open. I don't want to say are opening. You know, it's up to the COE, the accrediting body, to say you can open. In suburban Atlanta, which would be called Chamberlain University there, which is not affiliated with Ross, but it's a sister school of Ross. A sister school of St. George, tied to Rocky Vista University, is going to be opening in Billings, Montana. I'm working with Lincoln Memorial, which Dean Anderson here is opening both a PA, a DO program and a veterinary program, and hopefully just south of Jacksonville in Orange Park, Florida. And then Hanover College, a small, about nearly 200-year-old institution in Indiana, wants to develop a vet school that would be more hybrid than we've ever seen. So I'm involved with that. So that's, if I didn't add it up, it should be 6. And then Utah State already has a vet school, but it's a 2+2 program with Washington State. Utah has now decided they want to have the entire 4-year program. So it's not a brand new school. There are already 30 students a year in Utah going to Utah State for the first 2 years and finishing at Wazoo and Pullman. But that'll be a separate program. And there are discussions about programs in Arkansas State and Eastern Arkansas in the Delta. There's discussions about a program in Murray State in Kentucky. I don't know how far along those are. But Lincoln Memorial's program, which Stacy should speak to, in Orange Park, Florida, has its first site visit in the second week of November, in Lyon College in Little Rock, where Eleanor's dean will have its first site visit the first week of November. So the process is kicking off, but I'll just throw out to the group, the COE, in their defense, the accrediting body, has never looked at the number of schools at the same time that they're looking at. And it's a massive staffing problem. And many of us hope that they'll do what they did in COVID and utilize virtual technology for a number of the conversations they want to have with each school, because you can do that now. We've got, 50 of us here on this call. I mean, we could have a discussion. So there's going to be challenges for how fast this goes, but that's kind of roughly the number out there. So it sounds to me like there's 8 for sure. I can speak up for 6. And I think there's maybe as many as 10. Somebody has said 12. I'm not sure how that math works, but it's a bigger number than we've ever seen. Though there was a burst at the end of the 70s. Some of the folks here may remember when Mississippi State, NC State, and some others came online, a number in that era. So we've had a burst before, but never quite at the scale that we're now looking at. So let me kick it to the D.
Well, let me first, because we had an incredible conversation before COVID happened with AAVMC talking about trying to evolve and change veterinary medicine. And Dr. McCabe was wonderful in indicating, we do have challenges in changing the approach to veterinary medicine due to a multi list of factors. But then COVID hit. And as you mentioned, Mark, then all of a sudden people were kind of forced into this notion of changing and looking at the hybrid. So I guess I'm really looking for Dr. Green and Dr. Anderson to really kind of talk to us, like, what is different about these two? You guys are the deans of emerging schools. And so what is changing? Is it going to be the same cookie cutter approach of what we've seen, or is it going to be different?
Stacy, why don't you take off since your program's launched and successful and going?
Yeah, so as much of the shortage is hitting general practice and practitioners across the country, world, we are facing that shortage even more acutely, I think, in academia. Academic salaries do not keep up with private practice salaries for the most part. And so we are going to have to get innovative in how we deliver curriculum, because there are not enough specialists to teach at all of these new schools, much less the schools that are already existing. And so at LMU, where we don't have a teaching hospital, we've always struggled to keep certain types of specialists on our faculty, such as radiologists, clinical pathologists, small animal internists. And so we have developed a very, I think, effective way of teaching those subjects by having DVM faculty as the course directors, and then bringing in the experts, the boarded folks, to teach the material to the students. So you keep a continuity in the course with a full-time faculty who's a DVM and hopefully has an interest in the area, and then you bring in the boarded people who, honestly, even though they're in private practice or industry, they still like to teach. They still like to, contribute to the future of veterinary medicine. And so we bring them in and teach those courses that way. And I see that just expanding as these new programs come along. Already faculty are going to locum and teach at other institutions, and there might be at some point a move towards, designing a curriculum that can be used by multiple programs without having to necessarily have a full FTE delivering that curriculum. So that's kind of, I think, the way that the educational model is going to have to evolve, and that will involve some convincing of our accreditor to realize that you don't have to have a full-time specialist in every specialty to have a veterinary school.
I think that's a great comment or comments, Dr. Anderson. And I think there are some other things we really need to think about. And just like there are changes in veterinary healthcare itself, there are changes in veterinary education that we really need to look at. And if you look at them, what are they? They're technological. We used to talk about pedagogy, but you know what? It's really andragogy, because these are adult learners, and we'll talk about adult learners in a minute, but also organizational and structural. So if we look, what is the student of the future? It's an adult learner. They grow up in the digital revolution. They are connected. They communicate through technology. They expect things to be different. They don't rely on the old ways in a lecture. And I think here's something else that we need to know when we think about the future of veterinary education. Medical information changes, doubles every 73 days with a half-life of 18 to 24 months. Every 73 days. This time of us sitting with a master expert in front of a lecture hall, lecturing to us and telling us what to learn and being fact-based is over. It's over. The students don't want it. It's not the right way to do things. And we need to do things a lot differently than we did it before. And so those are a couple of things we need to think about. The adult learner, they want to be part of learning. They want to contribute to learning. They want to do it collaboratively. They want to do it in groups. They want peer-to-peer learning. And here's the other thing. We may feel challenged by this, but they question, is this important? They use their own experience to make assessments about whether this material is important or not. And so we get challenged more. So it's a different student than we used to have in a different time with different technologies. So I think, Stacy, you and I can both talk about some of the technologies that are going to happen. But you know what? Let me just take off on that right now. The times of us using live animals in teaching other than non-invasive type of procedures, I think is past. We may not know it's over, but it's over. And nobody is going to want to raise puppies to be used for an anatomy lab. Now, the Will Body program works in some cases, and I get that. But we need to go to technologies and simulations to teach everything we can before a student gets to a live animal. Now, a lot of people may say, yeah, but they got to get to the live animal. And yes, they do. But ask yourself, if you would like for your first injection to be on a live animal that you're stabbing around on, or would you like to get really competent in using the instruments and hitting veins and doing all the things that simulations will allow you to do, and then go to the animal when you are confident? And students will love that. They'll think of that so much more positively because they'll have more confidence rather than being lacking confidence as they start a procedure, and so they're tentative about it. So I'll leave that for right now, but there's a lot more to talk about. And if anybody wants to talk about it, I can talk about this all night, about simulations, low fidelity, high fidelity, what they mean in education, virtual reality, how we can create a world around these students and let them be an avatar within this world. And some people are calling it the metaverse, MED, rather than, we can call it the vetiverse. But we can create all kinds of opportunities. They can practice surgeries on an actual patient virtually before they ever go to the patient. You know, the technology. And by the way, a lot of people who say you have to dissect a cadaver and you can't use virtual reality, you know what's around the corner with virtual reality is embedding sensation. You have gloves in there and it feels like real tissue. What about that? So anyway, I could go on and on. I won't. If anybody has any questions or want me to go on and on, I will, because I love this subject.
So before, I'm going to let Stacy jump on anything she wants to add, but then we're going to go to a few of the questions. I love that everything is showing up in the chat. So we'll take after Stacy, we'll take a break. We'll dive into some of these questions with Cheryl and Shannon. So Stacy, Dr. Stacy, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I'd like to reiterate the value of simulation and using that in teaching. It's a cornerstone of our program at LMU, and you know, I feel like our students graduate with some of the best surgical skills in the business because they spend so much time learning on models. So yeah, just another shout out for that.
Okay, wait, Dr. Rustin wants to make a comment. Go for it.
Yeah, two. One is regarding something that Stacy said earlier, and really about where we're going to find our faculty. What I think we have to do, and we're already doing it, and I know others are too, is many specialists in private practice do want to teach a little bit. And many faculty in academia want to make more money. And so we have to find a way to partner, and more so. And we, you know, we've embraced that with MVH and others. And I think we all need to do that. The other thing, speaking more back to what Eleanor said and Stacy reiterated around, you know, technology, virtual reality, low to high fidelity models, those are all really important to help students. And so in our curriculum our new curriculum that we started a year ago, it's completely based on this competency-based veterinary education framework from the AAVMC. And students are in getting hands-on skills first week, first year, and every week of all 3 years, with the goal of building them. And the one thing we have to remember is one of the reasons why it's so expensive is we have to prepare our graduates to be day one ready. Whereas in medical school, they go on for 4, 5, 6 to 9 more years, depending on the specialty they go into. And so I really think we have to think about how we do that. And some of the comments that were in the chat around access to care, we have taken the approach that, which, you know, there's a lot of phrases and terms out there: spectrum of care, access to care, contextualized care, incremental care. But we believe that spectrum of care sort of covers that spectrum, no pun intended, to teach our students. So when they get out, and spectrum of care is nothing new. Veterinarians have done this for decades. But as veterinary schools and veterinary teaching hospitals and even practices have gotten more and more tertiary, our students have not seen routine things, and therefore, you know, anything that comes in with I'll make up an example, a cranial cruciate a TPLO or TTA is the answer. Well, no, it's not the answer. There's many other options. And so trying to teach students so that when they graduate, that they can deliver affordable, accessible care across a broad socioeconomic array, but also even people with money might not, if they have a 12-year-old dog that's a couch potato that tore its CCL, maybe it doesn't need a TPLO. And so those are the things that I think we really have to discuss when we think about pedagogy and training the next generation of veterinarians. With all the technology and all the advances in veterinary medicine, we still have to think about affordable, accessible care and meeting the client and the patient where they are.
Catherine, what one quick note.
Lost control.
I would, if I had one wish, it'd be this, that people would relax and be comfortable with experimentation. Just don't be afraid. And Rustin's the best example. Ohio State's one of the most sophisticated, but it's also one of the most innovative programs in the country. It's just not a quote land grant school. It's a whole lot more. But the point is, don't be afraid to have models that try different curriculum, different clinical training. You know what? We'll discover it if there's a problem, but so far not the case. And hemomedicine's been so much more flexible in its way of looking at both levels of practitioners as well as the way you train. And my wife teaches at Mayo, and Mayo has one full-time faculty member. How's that sound to people? Can you imagine a vet school with one full-time faculty member? I mean, the point is there's lots of ways to do things. And so what I hope the COE does now is has their arms open going, we appreciate your interest, school. It's a major investment, whatever your model is. We'll try different things and we'll learn from it. And I know, Ohio State, the last school in the country, afraid of that. And they'll study it and learn it. And if somebody has something that they want to try, Rustin will do it even better. So that's really got to be the mentality now. And that's a mind shift. Maybe for this audience, I doubt it, but mind shift for the profession. Just be willing to see different models tried and don't be afraid. Just let things play out and let's see, give them some time to play out and let's see what we have. I think we'll be surprised in a good way.
So let's go ahead and quickly get to some of the questions because I am looking at our time and there's a few more things for us to address. So Dr. Cheryl, do you want to point out any key questions that popped to the front that you wanted to bring forward?
Yeah, question, comment. Virginia had mentioned that she was curious how an increase in DVM graduates will address the access to care issue related to the rising cost of care. And also wonders, curious to know how the profession will provide more members of the veterinary healthcare team, which Rustin touched on, credentialed veterinary technician specialists in order to sustainably support and retain these new DVMs.
Go ahead, Eleanor.
I'll start with Texas A&M and then LMU. But I think that one of the things we need to do, if you're talking about rural veterinary medicine in particular, is that is a lifestyle choice. And you're not going to get anybody from downtown Manhattan to go to a rural community in the West Texas area. You're just not. And so, and then a lot of those young people from those rural areas aren't able to compete. They have a graduating class of 10, 20 people. They don't have the same advantages that a person in a big metropolitan area has. And so they don't get into vet school, and yet they're very bright and they would make great veterinarians. So what can we do to reach out to those communities? One thing we did at A&M was we created a 2+2 program with West Texas A&M, which is out in Canyon, Texas. And it allows some of those young people to have access to start their first 2 years there to they can stay at home while they go to vet school. Anyway, there's some areas to do that. And I won't get into all the ways to get people back to rural areas, but that's something we're going to be looking at in Lyon College in Little Rock too, because Arkansas is largely a rural state and there's a real need there. And we can talk all night about those programs too, but I'll just leave it that we're going to address that as well.
Eleanor, were you talking about downtown Manhattan, New York, and Manhattan, Kansas?
not Kansas State. I'm talking Park Avenue.
Just trying to add a little levity.
Yeah, I know. You always do, Rusty.
And Mark, did you want to make an add to that?
No, I think, Eleanor made a great point. I mean, I think, doctors fought forever the creation of PAs. They fought them. Legislature by legislature, they fought them. You know what every doctor practice in America wants today? A PA. Please go find me a PA that can come into my practice and help me out. I mean, the way this will work, you'll have people from different programs that have different specialties, different tendencies, and just relax as they find their place, because the demand is such that they won't have a problem finding something. And that, I think, human medicine's path is one that we'd be happy to follow, and we shouldn't be afraid of it.
So before we let Shannon go, I know Cheryl's got one more question. You're on mute.
So sorry. Anna Radish is asking, in the spirit of embracing educational change, she's curious to hear what role the animal health industry can play in supporting the new adult learner in veterinary school.
Ooh, great question.
All right, I'll jump in again if nobody else is going to. At LMU, we've already reached out to several people in the industry. We've reached out to Farm Bureau and to the Poultry Federation and to the Cattlemen's Association and all the different organizations there. Cabot Animal Support Systems it's a shelter program. And we have everybody jumping on board. Windrock Farm, owned by and developed by the Rockefellers, they're going to give us their whole multi-thousand-acre ranch to use to teach our students. We've got Rockefeller Institute, who's going to allow us to use that whole facility that they have. And look up Rockefeller Ethic if you ever want to, and what that goal is. So I guess what I'm saying is that all we have to do is ask. All we have to do is let people know that we need them to help. And not only will they help with their own time, talent, and resources, but they are the ones that have the power in the legislature, and they can go and help us at the legislative level. A lot of opportunities. And I think Rusty said it earlier, it's about partnerships. We can't pay for this alone. We can't do it alone. We can partner with private practices. We can partner with these organizations who will support us and give scholarships and a lot of other support. So I think partnership. And the one thing we've left out is partnerships with other schools. I think we've got to start sharing curriculum. We got to start sharing resources. Wouldn't it be great if the best ophthalmologist in the country is teaching all the veterinary students in the country? Now that's down the road, but we're making tiny little forays into that now that haven't been possible in the past. Wouldn't it be great if we develop the greatest teaching module there is on some subject and we say, I'm going to give that to all the vet schools? This isn't a competition. It's a collaboration in creating the best vet students there are. And I think that's something we've all got to think about.
Shannon, I'll tee it on over to you.
Okay. So I want to ask a little bit about money, because I know that financially affording an education for both veterinarians and technicians is often a barrier. And we're talking about adding all of these new technologies, which to me just equals more dollar signs. So what are we doing to help with that so that that's not continuing to be a problem?
There's two examples right now. There's a major animal health industry company prepared to deliver 3 core courses at no cost because of the amount of experts they have in their company that can deliver that course. Okay, that's a typical cost for a vet school that would no longer be a cost, and that can be savings back to the students. The large corporate practices, what everyone thinks of corporate practices, have your own thoughts, but the ability to offer rotations and not charge for that and have that be reflected back in a tuition reduction. So part of the whole magic here, and Rustin knows this, I mean, if Ohio State didn't exist today and Rustin came to the legislature in Ohio and said, I wanted to create the school that he has now, I can't even guess at the price tag to do it at the scale you've done it, Rustin, and the school's done it, for generations. But it is possible now to leverage partners in the industry to, by order of magnitude, reduce the cost of opening a school. And one of the best examples is 90 miles south of me here in Tucson. And the University of Arizona was a client of mine, a very sophisticated, big-time research program. and it was able to be much more efficient in how it built its program, and it was forced to do so during COVID. So you can do that. There's not escalating costs of veterinary education that can't be controlled. And to some extent, new schools have more freedom. So I think that we'll see that, I think, in some of the new models.
I would also say that many of the more established schools, meaning they've been around for a longer time, they have clearly more alumni. And if they have a teaching hospital, they have grateful clients. And so we have been able to, in the last 8 years, reduce the debt of our students from over 200,000 to 160,000 by increasing philanthropic scholarships from 370,000 a year to 3.2 million. So there are many ways, and some of those are grateful clients, some are alumni, some are actually corporate veterinary practices and others. And so we have to be innovative, and we have to look at how we can all benefit from it. And every school is different, and that's a great thing. Think about diversity, right? The value of diversity is that it adds to a better, in our case, a better profession. And so no two schools are the same, and none of us are going to be able to approach this situation in the same way, but we can share and learn from one another, because I would say for probably not at all do any of us as veterinary schools compete against each other. I mean, yeah, we might compete with each other to get certain students, but there's so many qualified students out there. I mean, I think we get about 2,700 applicants a year. We could probably take the top 500, throw them in a hat and pull out a name, and we would be great. And so it's really more about not competing, but working together, whether it's, among academic institutions, corporate, and many other programs, just like Eleanor said, partnership.
And when you go to, by the way, I love development, the philanthropy part of it, but veterinary medicine has so much to sell to donors. Sell's not the right word, but to appeal to donors. We have puppies and kittens. We got feeding the world. We have technologies that rival human healthcare. I don't care what it is. You can find something that interests almost any potential donor in the nation. And I always told them that the state funds us for existence. You fund us for excellence. And they really seem to like that line. And Stacy, I wish you'd comment on the number of faculty you have versus hospital-based teaching hospital, and how you save a lot of money with visiting professors.
Yeah, and when talking about cost, so at a private nonprofit like ours, human resources is our top cost. That's most of my budget, honestly. And we still run a very lean faculty, I think. Up until we started expanding, we're about 40 faculty, 40 staff. We'll be going up to probably 60, 70 faculty staff with 225 students per year. And again, though, you can save a lot by bringing in people part-time, because you're not paying their benefits, you're not paying all of the overhead costs of having a full-time employee, and still getting the benefits of an expert in their field. So yeah, I can't speak to that enough.
Yeah, to that point though, and not specifically, we actually have to hire locums to fill faculty who are actually off doing locums. Somebody's benefiting, and I'm certainly not saying LMU. I'm just saying there, that's where we have to look for true partnerships of how we do this. And I as I said, as Eleanor said earlier, do we have to deliver didactic education in the classroom, or can it be done technologically? And if we could come to some consensus around common curricula, perhaps based on the CBVE framework, think how efficient we could be.
Can I make just a
I would
couple
like to-
comments before we?
Sorry, go for it, Bill.
We're talking about, we saw the big increase in clinics when we saw large corporations, when they saw the money to be made. I think we're going to see the same thing in vet schools. Ross has 1,400 students. That's a lot of money. You're going to see a lot of hedge fund corporations come up with corporations that start schools left and right. Will their quality be as good as they are now? I just got back from Ross. Ross impressed me. I like what they do and the way they do it. So I think we're going to see a lot more of those. And once they get in, just like the school going into Atlanta, once it gets in and the money starts flowing in, it's not going to stop. There'll be more schools and more schools. That's my one point. The other point is simulation and sharing. I just formed a group of 3 universities and myself where we design models, and it's a not for sale model. It's a nonprofit model. We're designing a model now where when we get it designed and we get it unofficially validated, then the material list, step-by-step instructions, and even help from me if any school wants it, we send it to them, and it's all free. And that's the way it should be. And we'll continue designing models and making them available to everybody.
I love that. I absolutely love that. You guys, as we always work really hard at Bridge Club to wrap up really quick. So I'll let you in just one second, Eleanor, give your point, but I do want to know what our call to action is tonight, Mark. I want to know what we can be doing on this when the podcast airs, when the video is playing. What can we as veterinary professionals do to help with bringing these schools forward, supporting them, et cetera? What do you need our call to action to be tonight? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I think we're all tired of fighting. We've had a lot of fights the last 3, 4, 5 years. Don't fight major institutions that are prepared to invest in people like Eleanor Green at a new program in Arkansas. LMU that despite resistance is now moving forward and having a second program. Don't fight. We're in the US. I mean, let me just be kind of patriotic about it. We're in a country that experiments. Relax. Give vet techs a chance to expand what they do and recognize them for it financially. Don't take the mid-level professional and spend a year demonizing it and saying it can't work, and turn to human medicine and say, well, it's worked for you for 60 years, but somehow we're so different, we won't even try it. Sit back. If you're right, let the first program fail on its face and say, weren't we right? But just relax. If I had any wish right now, just let some experimentation and innovation flow, whether it's at a sophisticated school like Ohio State, at a new program. Let's just see how it goes. You know, we have a thing called the NADLI. You have to get examined to be allowed to practice medicine, just as you do in the law. Human medicine has just lapped veterinary medicine and innovation. And our defense to that has been, we're different. How about give me some of that? How about take a look at that? You're a laboratory. We can study what you do and see how you do it well. That'd be my hope. And I think that's actually going to be what's happened. I think there'll be fights against the new schools. There'll be pressures. But you know what? People will hire those students and they'll go, wow, you made my practice able to serve more people. So thanks. And I think that's where we'll get. But a big exhale right now wouldn't hurt the veterinary profession in the US on a lot of topics. This would be one.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Eleanor,
Another call to
you
action, I
report-
think, is
Oh.
for those schools that are state supported or land grants to encourage, inform, educate, etc., legislators and other state officials of why the veterinary profession is so important to animal health, human health, sustainability, food safety, security, etc. So they would invest in those schools at a level that is appropriate, which would help prevent it becoming an unaffordable education for those who could be really great veterinarians, but don't think they can do it because of the cost, and would allow some of those institutions to expand class size within their system because they would have additional facilities or additional faculty. So, you know, I think we collectively, I think veterinary schools are so underfunded by the state and certainly nothing really federally at this point. And that is something that I think is really could be a great call to action.
I think another call to action is to use your voice in whatever organization you're in, because a lot of times you'll get told what you think by an organization when you've never had a chance or have never taken the opportunity to express your views. And I'm not picking on COE because I never have and I never will. But if you look at where accreditation came from, a long time ago, people would just start doing something. They get better and better and better. And then people would come to them for that. There were no formal training, no accreditation, no nothing. And to protect the public, gradually we got to an accreditation process which says, look, this school is one you ought to go to. It can teach you well. And I think that's all good. But in any bureaucracy, rules are never taken away. They're always added. And a lot of things that have been added really do increase the cost. Back to the cost of education, a lot of those are to the fact that we have to do some things that are required by accreditation. Are they really optional or are they really required? So I think we need to take another hard look at accreditation at a broader view. But until we get there, just use your voice in your organization to express your views about the future of veterinary education.
So with that, we are at our time. So Mark, we're going to ask you to do our closing toast. If anyone has additional questions, please go ahead and put them into the chat. We will be addressing those later, so please do that. Also, I want to personally thank all of you for taking time out of your Monday evening to spend it with the Bridge Club and this amazing panel of folks, Dr. Eleanor Green, Dr. Stacy Anderson, Dr. Rustin Moore, and of course, Mark Cushing. So Mark, let's raise our glass and let's do our final toast.
Here's to the free exchange of good ideas and good debate. And thanks to all for paying attention and engaging. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.